In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and winding roads, there was a high school like any other. Students filled the hallways, laughing, chatting, and rushing to their next class. Among them was a girl who had recently moved to the area. She was new to the school, still figuring out where things were and trying to make friends. Her name wasn't important yet, but her story would soon become one everyone talked about. This girl came from a family that valued education and fairness. Her father worked hard in his profession, earning respect not just locally but across the region. He was someone people turned to when they needed help or advice. But she didn't rely on his reputation. Instead, she wanted to stand on her own 2 feet, prove herself without leaning on her family name. This independence was something she cherished deeply. Her first few days at the new school went smoothly enough. She introduced herself politely, answered questions in class, and tried to blend in with the crowd. But everything changed during third period history with Mrs. Harper, a teacher known for being strict, almost to the point of intimidation. Mrs. Harper ran her classroom like a drill sergeant, demanding silence, quick answers, and absolute obedience. Most students found her terrifying, but no one dared say anything. One morning, Mrs. Harper began teaching a lesson about colonial history. She used old maps and pictures, some of which showed outdated stereotypes. The girl raised her hand cautiously, hoping to offer a different perspective. "I think we could look at this from another angle," she said softly. "There's more to the story than what's shown here." Mrs. Harper paused, her sharp eyes narrowing as she looked at the girl. "That's not relevant right now," she replied curtly. The girl felt her cheeks flush but stayed quiet, deciding to let it go, for now. Later in the same class, she spoke up again, this time pointing out how certain groups were misrepresented in the materials. Again, Mrs. Harper cut her off. "Maybe you should focus on simpler topics," she said loudly, loud enough for the entire class to hear. The room fell silent except for a few awkward giggles. The girl sank lower into her seat, wishing she could disappear. She wasn't expecting praise, but she certainly didn't expect to be mocked either. It stung, not because of the laughter, but because she knew she was right. Still, she told herself it was just one bad day. Surely things would get better tomorrow. When she got home that afternoon, she replayed the scene over and over in her mind. Dinner was unusually quiet as she picked at her food, lost in thought. Her dad noticed immediately. He wasn't the kind of person to ignore when something seemed off. "What's wrong?" he asked gently, his voice full of concern. At first she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share, but then the words tumbled out. All the frustration, embarrassment, and anger poured onto the table like an open wound. Her dad listened carefully, his expression calm but serious. When she finished, he placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. "Standing up for what you believe in is always the right thing to do, and don't worry, I've got your back." There was a quiet determination in his tone that made her feel a little better. For the first time since leaving school, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things might turn around. But what neither of them realized at that moment was that this wasn't going to end quietly. What started as a single incident in a classroom would soon spiral into something much bigger, something that would challenge not only the teacher, but also the entire school community. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test their strength, resilience, and faith in doing what was right. The next morning, the girl woke up with a heavy heart. She had hoped that after talking to her dad, she'd feel stronger, more ready to face the day. But as she got dressed and packed her bag, doubt crept back in. What if Mrs. Harper singled her out again? What if the other students laughed at her? These thoughts swirled in her mind like a storm cloud she couldn't shake off. Still, she knew she couldn't stay home. Avoiding the problem wouldn't make it go away. Her dad, sensing her unease, gave her a warm hug before she left. "Remember," he said, his voice steady and calm, "you're not alone in this. And no matter what happens today, you've already shown courage by speaking your truth." His words stuck with her as she walked to school, though they didn't completely erase her nerves. By the time she reached the classroom, her hands were clammy, and her stomach felt like it was tied in knots. As soon as she stepped inside, she noticed Mrs. Harper writing on the board, her back turned to the class. The room buzzed with quiet, chatter. But when the girl took her seat, a few heads turned her way. Someone whispered something under their breath and another student snickered. She kept her eyes down, focusing on opening her notebook, pretending not to notice. For a moment she wished she could disappear entirely. When the bell rang, Mrs. Harper turned around and began the lesson without even glancing at the girl. Today's topic was about revolutions, how people stood up against unfair systems and fought for change. It was ironic, almost painful given what had happened the day before. As Mrs. Harper lectured, the girl couldn't help but think about how disconnected the teacher seemed from the very ideas she was teaching. Halfway through the class, Mrs. Harper posed a question to the group. "Can anyone tell me why protests are important?" she asked, scanning the room. A few hands went up hesitantly, but the girl stayed silent. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, not after yesterday. But then, Mrs. Harper's gaze landed on her. "You," she said, sharply pointing. "Let's hear your answer." The girl froze, caught off guard. All eyes were on her now, waiting. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. For a second, she considered giving a short, safe response just to get it over with. But deep down, she knew. She couldn't let fear silence her. Not again. Taking a deep breath, she spoke slowly but clearly. "Protests are important because they give people a voice when they feel unheard. They remind us that standing up for justice isn't always easy, but it's necessary." Mrs. Harper stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, instead of acknowledging the answer, she said coldly, "That sounds rehearsed. Did you read that somewhere, or did you actually think of it yourself?" The comment hit like a slap, leaving the girl speechless. Laughter rippled through the room once more, though some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or feel sorry for her. By lunchtime, the girl felt drained. She sat alone at a corner table, picking at her food. A few classmates glanced her way but didn't approach. She wasn't surprised. Most people avoided getting involved when someone else was in trouble. Just as she was about to pack up and leave early, a boy from her math class slid into the seat across from her. He was tall, with curly hair and a kind smile. "Hey," he said softly. "I just wanted to say, I thought what you said in history was really smart. Don't let Mrs. Harper get to you." She looked up, startled. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. At least, not in this school. "Thanks," she murmured, managing a small smile. "I didn't expect anyone to notice." The boy shrugged. "Well, I did, and so did others, even if they're too scared to say anything. You're not alone, okay?" Those simple words lifted a tiny weight off her shoulders. Maybe she wasn't as isolated as she'd thought. After finishing her lunch, she headed to her locker, feeling slightly lighter. That's when she saw him. Her dad. He stood near the entrance wearing a casual jacket and jeans, looking every bit like a regular visitor. At first, she wondered why he was there. Had something happened? Was he checking up on her? But when their eyes met, she understood. He gave her a subtle nod, signaling that everything was fine. She realized then that he must have come to the school to talk to someone, to figure out what was going on. Suddenly, she felt a surge of gratitude mixed with nervous excitement. If anyone could handle this situation, it was him. Later that afternoon, while the girl was in science class, her dad met with the principal. Dressed casually, he introduced himself simply as her father and explained that he wanted to discuss her transition to the new school. The principal, eager to impress, assured him that the staff was committed to helping all students succeed. When the conversation turned to specific teachers, her dad mentioned Mrs. Harper casually, asking what kind of instructor she was. "Oh, Mrs. Harper is one of our best," the principal replied proudly. "She's been here for years and knows how to keep order in the classroom. Students respect her." Her dad nodded thoughtfully, hiding his skepticism. "Interesting," he said. "I'd love to see her in action sometime. Would it be possible for me to sit in on one of her classes?" The principal agreed without hesitation, seeing it as an opportunity to showcase the school's strengths. Little did they know this visit would reveal far more than anyone anticipated. As her dad left the office, he allowed himself a small, determined smile. He knew exactly what he was walking into, and he was ready. Meanwhile, the girl tried to focus on her remaining classes, though part of her mind kept drifting to what might happen next. She didn't know the details of her dad's plan, but she trusted him completely. Whatever came next, she told herself, she'd face it head on. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself means having someone stand beside you, and she was lucky enough to have the strongest ally imaginable. The next morning, the girl woke up with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. There was nervousness, yes, but also a flicker of hope. She had spent most of the night replaying the conversation with her dad in her mind. His quiet confidence gave her strength, even if she still wasn't sure how things would play out. As she got ready for school, she tried to focus on the little things, tying her shoelaces tightly, smoothing down her hair, making sure her bag was packed neatly. These small actions helped calm her racing thoughts. When she arrived at school, the hallways felt busier than usual. Students buzzed around, chatting and laughing as they headed to their first classes. For a moment, it almost felt normal. But then she remembered. Today was the day her dad would sit in on Mrs. Harper's class. The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through her chest. What if Mrs. Harper figured out who he was? What if she doubled down on her harsh behavior, trying to prove a point? Or worse, what if nothing changed at all? She walked into the classroom with her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mrs. Harper was already there, standing at the front of the room, arranging papers on her desk. When she glanced up and saw the girl enter, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was subtle, but the girl noticed. That look said everything. Mrs. Harper hadn't forgotten what happened yesterday, and neither had the rest of the class. A few minutes later, the bell rang, signaling the start of the lesson. Just as everyone settled into their seats, the door opened again. Her dad stepped inside, dressed casually in jeans and a plain jacket. He nodded politely to Mrs. Harper, who barely acknowledged him. To her, he probably looked like just another parent observing quietly from the back. She gestured vaguely toward an empty chair near the wall and continued setting up for the class. As Mrs. Harper began teaching, the girl kept stealing glances at her dad. He sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed but attentive. His presence seemed to fill the room, though he didn't say a word. The girl couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride watching him. Here was someone who carried himself with such dignity, someone who always stood by his principles no matter the situation, and now he was here, for her. Mrs. Harper launched into the day's topic, global conflicts throughout history. She spoke in her usual clipped tone, pacing back and forth across the front of the room. Occasionally, she stopped to ask questions, calling on students randomly without giving them much time to think. Some answered correctly, others stumbled over their words, earning sharp corrections from Mrs. Harper. The tension in the air was palpable, and the girl could see her classmates, shrinking into their seats, hoping not to be called on next. Then, inevitably, Mrs. Harper turned her attention to the girl. "Let's hear your take on this," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "since you seem so eager to share opinions." The entire class went silent, waiting to see how the girl would respond. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to stay calm. Taking a deep breath, she replied steadily, "I think understanding different perspectives is important. It helps us learn why people make certain choices even if we don't agree with them." For a split second, Mrs. Harper looked taken aback. Then her expression hardened again. "That's quite the speech," she said dryly. "But maybe you should focus less on philosophizing and more on getting the facts right." A few students snickered nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The girl clenched her fists under her desk, fighting back tears. She hated feeling powerless, hated being treated like she didn't belong. And then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, her dad cleared his throat softly. At first, no one noticed. He was still seated, blending into the background. But when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that demanded attention. "Excuse me," he said calmly, standing up. Every head in the room swiveled toward him, including Mrs. Harper's. I couldn't help but overhear that last comment, he continued, his tone measured but firm. My daughter isn't just philosophizing, she's offering insight, a perspective that adds value to the discussion. Dismissing her ideas so casually doesn't encourage learning. In fact, it does the opposite. It shuts down curiosity and discourages students from engaging. The room fell completely silent. Even the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder than usual. Mrs. Harper stared at him, her face pale. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. Who are you? She stammered, glancing between him and the principal's office, as if searching for answers. Her dad smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. I'm her father, he said simply. And I'm here because I want to understand how my child is being taught. Clearly, there's some work to be done. Mrs. Harper opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, visibly flustered. The students exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering behind cupped hands. The girl sat frozen in her seat, her cheeks burning, but not from embarrassment this time. It was something else, something closer to awe. Her dad hadn't yelled or lost his temper. He had simply stated the truth, letting his words do the talking. After a long pause, Mrs. Harper managed to mutter an apology, though it sounded hollow. Her dad nodded once, satisfied, and took his seat again. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Mrs. Harper stuck to basic facts for the remainder of the period, avoiding any further confrontations. The girl, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of relief and exhilaration. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but within her too. By the end of the lesson, the atmosphere was electric. As the bell rang, students lingered longer than usual, murmuring among themselves. Some shot quick smiles at the girl as they left, while others lingered near her desk. One girl leaned over and whispered, "That was amazing. Your dad really stood up for you." Another boy added, "Yeah, I wish someone would have done that for me when I got in trouble last year." For the first time in days, the girl felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be the end of the story. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Not just for her, but for everyone in the class. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for the girl, though her mind was anything but calm. Everywhere she went, whispers followed her. In the hallway, students who had barely noticed her before now nodded or smiled as she passed. Some even stopped to say kind words, things like, "Your dad's pretty cool," or "I can't believe he stood up to Mrs. Harper like that." At first, she didn't know how to respond. The attention felt strange, almost overwhelming. But as the hours went by, she began to realize something important. She wasn't alone anymore. For weeks, she'd carried the weight of Mrs. Harper's harsh words all by herself. She'd replayed those moments over and over in her head, wondering what she could have done differently. Now, though, it was clear that others had been watching and they cared. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her dad's actions had sparked something bigger, something that reached beyond the classroom walls. People were talking, not just about her, but about fairness, respect, and standing up when things weren't right. By the time lunch rolled around, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter about what had happened earlier. A group of students gathered at a nearby table, their voices rising excitedly as they debated the events of the morning. One boy said, "Mrs. Harper totally deserved that. She's always so rude to everyone." Another chimed in, "Yeah, but did you see how quiet she got when his dad spoke? I've never seen her back down before." The girl sat quietly at her usual corner table, listening to the conversations around her. She felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and even a little guilt. Part of her wished none of this had happened. She hated being the center of attention. But another part of her couldn't deny the sense of validation she felt. For the first time, someone outside her family had acknowledged that she mattered, that her voice was worth hearing. As she picked at her food, the boy from math class, the one who had spoken to her yesterday, walked over again. He slid into the seat across from her, a grin spreading across his face. "So," he said teasingly, "you're officially famous now." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't think I'd call it that." "Why not?" he replied. "Everyone's talking about you. And honestly, it's about time someone called Mrs. Harper out. She acts like she's perfect, but we all know she's not." The girl hesitated, unsure how much to share. Finally, she admitted, "I didn't expect any of this to happen. My dad, he just wanted to make sure I was okay. I didn't think he'd say anything in front of the whole class." "Well, I'm glad he did," the boy said earnestly. "You shouldn't have to deal with stuff like that on your own. Nobody should." His words stayed with her long after they finished eating and parted ways. As she walked to her next class, she thought about how easy it would have been for her to stay silent, to let Mrs. Harper's comments slide without pushing back. But deep down, she knew that staying quiet wouldn't have solved anything. Sometimes, standing up meant taking risks, even if it felt scary or uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, word spread that Mrs. Harper had been called into a meeting with the principal. No one knew exactly what was said behind closed doors, but rumors flew fast. Some students claimed she looked shaken when she returned to her desk later that day. Others whispered that she might be in trouble for how she treated certain kids in class. Whether any of it was true remained unclear, but one thing was certain: Mrs. Harper wasn't acting like her usual self. In her final period, the girl found herself sitting through yet another history lesson, but this time, it felt different. Mrs. Harper spoke in a softer tone, pausing occasionally to ask if anyone had questions. When a student hesitated to answer, she didn't snap or criticize them. Instead, she offered encouragement, saying things like, "That's okay, take your time," or "Good effort, we'll get there together." It was subtle, but the change was noticeable. Even the other students seemed more engaged, raising their hands and participating in discussions they might have avoided before. The girl couldn't help but wonder, was this real, or was Mrs. Harper simply putting on an act? Either way, it was a start. After school, the girl met her dad near the entrance. His expression softened when he saw her approaching. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice warm with concern. "It was..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Different. Better, I think. Everyone's talking about what happened, and Mrs. Harper seems different too, like maybe she's trying to fix things." Her dad nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes people need a wake-up call to see where they're going wrong. That doesn't mean they'll change overnight, but it's a step in the right direction." They started walking toward home side by side. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the streets. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then the girl said quietly, "Thank you for coming today. I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You don't need to thank me. You've always had strength inside you. All I did was remind everyone else to see it." As they turned onto their street, the girl felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Life wasn't perfect, it probably never would be. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that change was possible, even in places where it seemed impossible. Hopeful that standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. And hopeful that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't have to face them alone. The next few days at school felt like walking through uncharted territory for the girl. Everything seemed different, yet eerily familiar at the same time. The hallways were still crowded with students rushing to their classes, but now, some of them greeted her with smiles or nods she hadn't noticed before. Teachers who had barely acknowledged her presence in the past suddenly made an effort to ask how she was doing. Even Mrs. Harper's demeanor shifted. She wasn't warm by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a noticeable absence of sharpness in her tone. Still, the girl couldn't shake off the feeling that people were watching her more closely than usual. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if everyone expected her to say or do something groundbreaking. She didn't want to disappoint them, but she also didn't want to live under a microscope. Being thrust into the spotlight wasn't something she'd ever asked for, and honestly, it made her uncomfortable. All she wanted was to go back to being invisible, blending into the background like she used to. But life has a way of pushing you forward when you try to step back. One afternoon, during study hall, a group of classmates approached her table. They weren't kids she hung out with regularly. just faces she recognized from various classes. One of them, a quiet girl with glasses and a shy smile, spoke up first. "Hey, we were wondering, do you think you could help us with something?" The girl blinked, caught off guard. "Help with what?" "Well," another student chimed in, "we've been talking about what happened with Mrs. Harper, and, we think maybe we should try to make things better around here. Like, not just for you, but for everyone." For a moment, the girl didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time focusing on her own struggles that she hadn't considered how others might feel stuck too. Sure, Mrs. Harper's behavior affected her directly, but these kids clearly had their own stories to tell. Stories of teachers dismissing their ideas, ignoring their questions, or treating them unfairly because of who they were or where they came from. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "What do you want to do?" The boy from math class, the one who always seemed to show up when she least expected it, spoke up next. "We thought maybe we could talk to someone, like the principal or someone higher up. Maybe even start a club or something, to give students a place to share their experiences." The idea hit her like a wave. A club? To speak out about unfair treatment? It sounded bold, almost risky, but at the same time it lit a spark inside her, a flicker of excitement mixed with determination. If enough people came together, maybe they really could create change. Not overnight, and not without challenges, but change nonetheless. "I don't know if I'm the right person to lead something like that," she admitted, fiddling with the edge of her notebook. "I'm not great at public speaking, and I don't want to draw more attention to myself." "That's okay," the quiet girl said quickly. "You don't have to do it alone. We're all in this together. Besides, you already stood up to Mrs. Harper, not once, but twice. That takes guts." Her words lingered in the air, sinking in slowly. For so long the girl had doubted herself, convinced that standing up meant being loud or fearless. But maybe courage didn't look the same for everyone. Maybe it was simply about refusing to stay silent, even when your voice trembled. "Okay," she said finally, surprising herself. "Let's give it a shot." Over the next week, the group met secretly during lunch breaks to brainstorm ideas. They decided to call themselves the Student Voice Initiative, a name suggested by the boy from math class. Their goal was simple: to create a safe space where students could discuss issues they faced at school, whether it was unfair grading, disrespectful comments, or anything else that made them feel unheard. At first, only a handful of students showed interest, but word spread quickly, especially after someone posted about the initiative on social media. By the end of the second week, nearly 20 kids gathered in the library after school to attend their first official meeting. Some shared personal stories, while others offered suggestions for improving communication between teachers and students. The girl listened intently, writing notes and occasionally adding her thoughts when prompted. One evening, as she sat at home reviewing the day's discussion, her dad walked into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, and gave her a knowing smile. "So, how's it going with this new project of yours?" She shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's okay, I guess. More people are joining than I expected." "That's good," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like you're making progress." "It's not just me," she replied quickly. "Everyone's helping. I'm just kind of along for the ride." He chuckled softly. "Don't sell yourself short. Sometimes leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about listening, supporting, and keeping the momentum going. From what you've told me, it sounds like you're doing exactly that." His words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. As she climbed into bed that night, she replayed the events of the past few weeks in her mind. Standing up to Mrs. Harper had been terrifying, yes, but it had also opened doors she never imagined. Doors to friendships, opportunities, and most importantly, a sense of purpose. By the following Monday, news of the Student Voice Initiative reached the ears of the school administration. The principal called the girl into his office not to reprimand her but to ask questions. He seemed genuinely interested in what the group was doing and promised to support their efforts however he could. It was a small victory, but one that filled her with cautious optimism. Change wouldn't come easily, and there would undoubtedly be bumps along the way. But as she left the principal's office that day, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Hope that fairness and respect could become the norm, not the exception. Hope that her voice and the voices of countless others would no longer go unnoticed. The momentum behind the Student Voice Initiative continued to grow, and with it came a mix of excitement and challenges. Each meeting brought new faces, students who had been hesitant at first but were now eager to share their stories. Some talked about teachers who dismissed their questions in class, while others opened up about feeling singled out or misunderstood because of how they looked, spoke, or dressed. Every story added weight to the group's mission, reminding them why they started this journey in the first place. For the girl, leading the initiative felt like walking a tightrope. On one hand, she was proud of what they were building, a space where people could speak freely without fear of judgment. On the other hand, she constantly worried about making mistakes or saying the wrong thing. She wasn't used to being in charge, and the responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. But every time doubt crept in, someone from the group would step up to reassure her. One afternoon, during a particularly lively discussion, the boy from math class leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great, you know. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words weren't loud, but they carried enough warmth to steady her nerves. Slowly, she began to realize that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating a team where everyone felt valued and heard. As word of the initiative spread, so did curiosity from outside the student body. Teachers started asking questions, some supportive and others skeptical. One teacher, Mr. Daniels, approached the group after hearing about their work. He was older, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, and he offered to mentor them. "If you're serious about making real change," he said, "you'll need guidance. Let me help." At first, the group hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, especially after experiences with teachers like Mrs. Harper. But Mr. Daniels proved himself through actions rather than words. He attended meetings, listened patiently, and shared advice without taking over. Under his guidance, the students learned how to draft formal proposals, organize events, and present their ideas professionally. For the first time, they felt equipped to tackle bigger challenges. Their first major project was organizing a school-wide assembly focused on inclusivity and respect. It was an ambitious goal, but the group was determined to make it happen. They divided tasks among themselves. Some worked on designing posters, others wrote speeches, and a few reached out to guest speakers. The girl took charge of coordinating everything, ensuring each piece of the puzzle fit together smoothly. Despite their enthusiasm, not everyone was on board. A handful of teachers expressed concerns, fearing the assembly might stir up unnecessary drama. Even some students grumbled, claiming it was a waste of time. "What's the point?" one boy muttered during lunch. "It's not like talking about this stuff will actually change anything." Those comments stung, but the group refused to let negativity derail their efforts. Instead, they doubled down, working harder to ensure the event would resonate with as many people as possible. They practiced their presentations tirelessly, fine-tuned every detail, and even created a short video featuring interviews with students sharing their own experiences of overcoming bias and unfairness. On the day of the assembly, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of seats filled quickly, and soon the room was packed with students, teachers, and even a few parents. As the lights dimmed and the screen lit up with the opening scene of their video, the girl stood backstage, her heart pounding. She glanced around at her teammates, who gave her encouraging nods. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, bright and warm, and for a moment she froze. The sea of faces staring back at her felt overwhelming. But then she remembered something her dad had told her. "When you speak, imagine you're talking to just one person, someone who needs to hear what you have to say." So she focused on a single face near the front, a girl sitting quietly, her expression thoughtful, and began to speak. "Hi, everyone," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for being here today. This isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about starting conversations that matter. Conversations about fairness, respect, and understanding. Because when we listen to each other, amazing things can happen. As she spoke, her confidence grew. She shared snippets of her own story, weaving in examples from the group's discussions and highlighting the importance of empathy. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from genuine appreciation. Her teammates followed with their presentations, each one adding depth and perspective to the message. By the end of the assembly, the atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted. There was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that change was possible if everyone played their part. Teachers approached the group afterward, offering praise and support. Even Mrs. Harper, standing near the back of the room, gave a reluctant nod of acknowledgement before slipping away. In the days that followed, the impact of the assembly rippled through the school. Students who had once kept to themselves began speaking up more in class. Teachers, inspired by the courage of their students, made conscious efforts to foster inclusive environments. And though progress was slow, it was undeniable. But perhaps the most profound change happened within the girl herself. She no longer saw herself as invisible or powerless. Through the ups and downs of the past weeks, she had discovered strength she didn't know she had. Leading the Student Voice Initiative hadn't been easy, but it had taught her that standing up for what's right is never a solo act. It's a collective effort, fueled by hope and determination. One evening, as she sat at home reflecting on everything that had transpired, her dad walked in with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Handing her one, he smiled and said, "Looks like you've started something special." She sipped her drink thoughtfully, then replied, "Yeah, I think we all have." The weeks that followed the assembly were a whirlwind of activity for the girl and her group. The Student Voice Initiative had gained traction beyond what anyone had expected, and with it came both rewards and challenges. More students joined, their meetings eager to contribute ideas or share their stories. Some teachers began incorporating discussions about inclusivity into their lesson plans, while others started holding reflection sessions where students could voice concerns without fear of judgment. It felt like the school was slowly waking up to the importance of listening, not just hearing, but truly understanding. But not everything went smoothly. Change never does. A small group of students mocked the initiative, calling it a feel-good project that wouldn't last. One boy even posted a sarcastic comment online saying, "Next thing you know, they'll be handing out participation trophies for being nice." The post got dozens of likes before it was deleted by the school's social media monitor. When the girl saw the comment, it stung. She couldn't help but wonder if maybe those critics were right, if this whole effort would fizzle out once the initial excitement wore off. Her teammates noticed the doubt creeping back into her eyes during their next meeting. "Hey," the boy from math class said gently, "don't let one jerk get to you. Remember why we're doing this." "I know," she replied, forcing a smile. "It's just, sometimes it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. Like no matter how hard we try, there will always be people who don't care." "That's true," he admitted. "But look around, all these people here. They care, and that's enough to keep going." His words reminded her of something important. Progress isn't measured by perfection, it's measured by effort. Even if not everyone supported the initiative, the fact that so many did made every challenge worth facing. One of the biggest hurdles came when the group decided to tackle a long-standing issue at the school: the outdated textbooks used in history classes. Many of the books painted incomplete pictures of historical events, focusing narrowly on certain perspectives while ignoring others entirely. The girl remembered how Mrs. Harper had relied on such materials during her lessons, reinforcing stereotypes instead of challenging them. Armed with research and examples, the group drafted a proposal asking the school to update its curriculum resources. They presented their case to the principal, highlighting how modern materials could foster a more inclusive learning environment. To their surprise, the principal agreed almost immediately. "You've made a compelling argument," he said. "Let's see what we can do." It wasn't a quick fix. Ordering new textbooks took time, and convincing some teachers to adapt their lesson plans required patience. But the fact that the administration listened gave the group a much-needed boost. For the first time, they felt like their voices mattered not just to each other, but to the people in charge. Amid all the work, The girl found moments of joy she hadn't anticipated. Friendships blossomed within the group as they spent hours brainstorming, debating, and laughing together. The quiet girl with glasses turned out to have a wicked sense of humor, while another teammate surprised everyone with his talent for drawing posters. Even the boy from math class revealed a softer side, often staying late to help organize materials or offer encouragement when someone felt discouraged. Her relationship with her dad also deepened during this time. He attended one of their meetings after finishing work early, sitting quietly in the corner as the group discussed upcoming projects. When it ended, he pulled her aside and said, "You're building something incredible here. I'm proud of you." She blushed, unused to hearing such praise directly. "We're just trying to make things better," she mumbled. "And that's exactly why it's incredible," he replied. Change starts with people who refuse to settle for good enough. As the months passed, the ripple effects of their efforts became impossible to ignore. Teachers held workshops to discuss cultural sensitivity, and student-led panels became a regular feature at parent-teacher conferences. The school newspaper ran a series of articles spotlighting diverse voices, giving students a platform to share their experiences. Slowly but surely, the culture of the school began to shift. Even Mrs. Harper seemed different. While she hadn't become warm or friendly overnight, her sharp edges softened considerably. During one class, she paused mid-lecture to acknowledge a point the girl had raised earlier about colonialism. "I appreciate your insight," she said simply, her tone neutral but sincere. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it meant something. For the girl, it was proof that even the hardest hearts could open up, given enough time and patience. By spring, the group decided to take their mission beyond the school walls. They organized a community event called Voices Unite, inviting local leaders, activists, and families to come together for a day of dialogue and celebration. The event featured panel discussions, art exhibits, and performances showcasing the diversity of the town. Planning it was exhausting, but the turnout exceeded all expectations. Hundreds of people showed up, filling the park with laughter, music, and meaningful conversations. Standing on stage at the end of the event, the girl looked out at the crowd and felt a surge of gratitude. This journey had been messy, unpredictable, and far from easy. But it had taught her something invaluable: that courage is contagious. When one person stands up, it gives others permission to do the same. Together, they could create a world where everyone's voice mattered, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. As fireworks lit up the night sky marking the close of the event, she turned to her teammates and said, "We did it." They cheered, hugged, and laughed, basking in the glow of what they'd accomplished. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, both inside the school and out. Yet, for the first time, she faced the future not with fear, but with hope. Hope that even the smallest actions could spark big changes. And hope that, no matter what lay ahead, she wouldn't have to face it alone. As the school year drew to a close, the girl found herself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in her life, but in the lives of those around her. The Student Voice Initiative had started as a small idea, born out of frustration and a desire for fairness. Now it was something much bigger, a movement that had touched hearts, sparked conversations, and inspired action. But more than anything, it had taught her the power of standing up for what's right, even when you're scared, even when it feels like no one is listening. The final meeting of the group took place in the library, where it all began. Students gathered around the same table, their faces tired but content. Finals were approaching, and everyone was busy wrapping up projects and preparing for exams. Still, they made time to come together one last time before summer break. It wasn't just about discussing plans for next year, it was about celebrating how far they'd come. "We did more than I ever thought possible," the quiet girl with glasses said, breaking the comfortable silence. She smiled shyly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I mean, who would have guessed we could actually change things?" "Not me," the boy from math class joked, earning laughter from the group. "When this started, I thought we'd be lucky if 5 people showed up to our meetings. Look at us now." The girl listened to their chatter, feeling a swell of pride. These weren't just teammates anymore. They were friends, allies, and partners in making the world a little better. Each person had brought something unique to the table, whether it was creativity, determination, or sheer heart. Together, they had created something none of them could have done alone. Her dad attended the meeting too, sitting quietly in the corner as he often did. When the discussion turned to future goals, he spoke up gently. "You've accomplished so much already, but remember, real change takes time. Don't get discouraged if progress feels slow sometimes. Keep pushing forward, and don't lose sight of why you started." His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would still be setbacks, skeptics, and moments of doubt. But they also knew they had built a foundation strong enough to weather those storms. The initiative wasn't just a project, it was a promise to keep fighting for fairness and respect, no matter what. On the last day of school, the halls buzzed with excitement. Students swapped phone numbers, promised to stay in touch over the summer, and posed for photos outside the main building. Teachers handed out report cards with smiles, wishing their classes well for the upcoming break. For the girl, it was bittersweet. She was ready for a rest, but saying goodbye to this chapter felt strange. So much had happened in such a short time. As she packed up her locker, she noticed Mrs. Harper walking by. The teacher paused briefly, meeting her gaze. "Have a good summer," Mrs. Harper said, her tone softer than usual. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't indifference either. The girl nodded, offering a small smile. "You too." Later that evening, she sat on the porch with her dad, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What are you thinking about?" he asked after a while. "Everything," she admitted. "How different things are now compared to when I first came here. Back then I just wanted to blend in, not make waves, but now—" "Now?" he prompted, raising an eyebrow. "Now I know that blending in isn't always the answer. Sometimes, you have to stand out, even if it's scary. Because when you do, other people might find the courage to stand with you." Her dad smiled, clearly proud. "That's a lesson most people spend their whole lives learning, and you're figuring it out now, which is pretty amazing." She leaned back in her chair, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Life hadn't become perfect. There were still challenges waiting around the corner. But she felt stronger, braver, and more hopeful than ever before. The journey wasn't over. It never really was. But she had learned to embrace the uncertainty, trusting that every step forward mattered. Over the summer, the group stayed connected through group chats and occasional meetups. They brainstormed ideas for the next school year, eager to build on what they'd started. The girls spent hours reading books recommended by Mr. Daniels, jotting down notes about leadership and advocacy. She even reached out to local organizations, asking how they could collaborate to expand their reach. By the time August rolled around, she was buzzing with excitement and a little nervousness about what lay ahead. When the new school year began, the Student Voice Initiative returned stronger than ever. Freshmen joined the group, inspired by stories they'd heard from upperclassmen. Teachers continued to support their efforts, incorporating feedback into lesson plans and classroom dynamics. Slowly but surely, the culture of the school shifted toward inclusivity and mutual respect. For the girl, the biggest change wasn't external, it was internal. She no longer saw herself as invisible or powerless. Instead, she viewed herself as someone capable of creating ripples that turned into waves. Every challenge she faced reminded her of her strength, and every victory reinforced her belief in the power of collective action. One evening, months later, her dad found her flipping through a photo album filled with memories from the past year. Pictures of team meetings, the assembly, and Voices Unite lined the pages, each one telling a piece of their story. "Remembering the good times?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Yeah," she replied, smiling softly. "It's crazy how much has changed since we started." "It's not crazy," he said firmly. "It's proof that when you speak up, people listen. You've shown everyone, including yourself, that your voice matters." She closed the album, holding it close to her chest. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her into a hug. "Anytime, kiddo. Anytime." As she drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about the future, not with fear, but with anticipation. The world was full of challenges, yes, but it was also full of opportunities to make a difference. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was ready to face whatever came next.